Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Gimel, and we'll begin with Rav Papa on daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis, 3 lines before the end of the Amud. Rav Papa I Asik Le Libre Be Abasura. So there was a man named Abba Surah. He came from a place called Surah. And he had a daughter to marry off. And Rav Papa was marrying off his own son to the daughter of Abba Surah. Now, there's a whole discussion here, which is not for us today, about the relationship between Rav Papa and Abba Surah. They were mechutanim, but that's not really relevant to us. That's just important historical background. But what's important is what happens on the way to the writing of the Ksuba. Azal lemichtav la ksubasa. Rav Papa is on his way to the house of the house of Abba Surah. Lemichtav la ksubasa. What's going on here, and we have to keep in mind that very often in the Gemara's language, the word ksuba is synonymous with nidunya. Nidunya is what we call in English a dowry. It means the possessions, the monies that a woman brings into marriage, and those are acquired by her husband with nisuin. So they are now about to sit down at a table. The father of the Chassan, that's Rav Papa, the father of the Kala, it's Abba Surah, and they are going to determine what will be the value of the Nidunya, meaning how much is Abba Surah willing to give his daughter towards this marriage? How much of a dowry, we would say, is he willing to offer, to contribute? Shama Yehuda Mar Meremar. And the word got around that this was about to take place. And a very great scholar by the name of Yehuda Bar Meremar heard that Rav Papa was coming to this local town, this location called Surah, in order to sign an agreement with Abba Surah. Nafak, and Yehuda Bar Meremar goes out, and Asa is Chazile. He sees Rav Papa on his way, so he escorts Rav Papa to the house of Abba Bar Surah, Abba Surah. But there's a curveball at the end of the story. Ki matu lepischa, when they got to the entry, so that you have Yehuda Bar Meremar escorting Rav Papa to the house of Abba Surah. When they get to the door, have a miftar mine. At that point, Yehuda says goodbye to Rav Papa. I'm out of here. I'm a lace, so Rav Papa says, Neil Mar Ba'adoi. Why shouldn't Mar, that's where you talk to a great scholar in third person, Neil go in Behadoi, together with me? Why are you saying goodbye to me and parting ways right here at the entry into the house of Abba Surah? You're more than welcome to join us. It might be a kavod that you would enhance this mamad, this experience that's about to take place. Now we start today's daf, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Rav Papa realized that Yehuda was hesitating. He was very inhibited about entering into the house. And now Rav Papa is going to do an entire analysis back and forth to understand why Yehuda Bar Meimar is inhibited about entering into the house. He doesn't want to see what's going to go on here. Amalei, Papa says to Madate, what is in your mind? Why are you hesitating to enter into this house? It must be based on a dictum of Shmuel, who said something in formulating his principle to Rabbi Yehuda. Now we have the phrase Shidina. Shidina means the sharp one, so that Shmuel turns to Rabbi Yehuda, who's always called in Shmuel's language the sharp one, and he tells him, Lo tehevi bi'ibure achsanta. Don't be a partner to any ma'amad, any situation in which a man is going to take his estate and transfer it and give it over to one of the children, or even to a friend, a non-relative, and in so doing, he's undermining the law of inheritance. The Torah in Parshas Pinchas and Matos, you'll see laws of inheritance. And don't be around to be a witness when you know and anticipate that what's going to happen here is that so and so Ploni Almoni is going to take the inheritance out of the hands of the heirs and give it over to someone else. Afilu mibra bisha lebra tava. Even if the man has two sons and he wants to take his estate and assign it instead of to the son who's wayward, he's off the beaten path, and give it over, assign it to the one who is on the right track, who is a tzaddik, even so, you shouldn't be there at the time that this is going to take place. Why? You can never know what grandchildren or great-grandchildren down the line, what descendants you might have, even from a son who is what we describe as a bra bisha. He's not observant. If we come to the Seder table at, on the night of Pesach, he's the Rasha of the four sons. But you never know what the next generation is going to have. And therefore, when this man is undermining the Yerusha from one son, in this case, the Bra Bisha, and giving it over to the Bra Hava, you don't want to be there. You don't want to see what's going on here. It's going to have a negative impact on your spiritual personality. And therefore, don't bother with it. Don't even go in there. V'kolshkein, and how much more so, mibra lebrata, if a man takes the inheritance that was designated by the Torah for his son, and he undermines that inheritance and he transfers all his funds to his daughter, leaving the Doraisa, the Torah law of inheritance outside the window. You're not even giving your son a little part of the Yerusha, nothing. You want to give all the money over to your daughter. Says Shmuel, you don't want to be there when that happens. And now I understand why Yehuda Bar Meremar is inhibited about entering into this room, because he is afraid that what's going to happen is that Abba Surah is going to transfer all his possessions, or at least a sizable, significant percentage of his monetary estate, over to his daughter in order to marry her off to my son, says Rav Papa. And that's going to undermine the inheritance of Abba Surah's sons in favor of the Nedunya of his daughter. Says Rav Papa, if that's what's bothering you, Yehuda Bar Meremar, then forget it. You shouldn't be bothered by that. Don't be inhibited. Why? Hi Nami. When Abba Surah is designating some of his possessions, his monetary assets to his daughter, that's Nedunya, Takanta Rabbanani. He is fulfilling exactly what the Rabbanan established as a takana. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. We have a statement that we quoted earlier in this sugya on Daf Nun Beis in the name of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that the Rabbanan wanted to encourage a father to offer a sizable percentage, maybe 10% even, of his assets for the Nedunya to make his daughter into a very good, give her an upgraded status on the market so people would want to marry her. So therefore, don't consider this as havaras nachla, as if something that's going on over here is illegitimate and you don't want to be part of it. Amalei Yehuda bar Meremar, a response of Papa. You're right. For sure, the Rabbanan encouraged a father to give sizable, significant funds for his daughter's marriage as an adunya. However, hani mili midaite, but la suye namit, with a question mark. If a man wants to marry off his daughter and out of the goodness of his heart, in a very sincere, genuine way, he wants to part with his possessions and transfer them over to his daughter, that's fine. That's midaita. The goodness of his heart. He's well motivated. But if we're going to compel him to do so, if we're going to pressure him, even if it's psychological pressure, then that's not something that the Rabbanan want. Rav Papa said to him, did I ask you to enter into this room and compel Abba to part with his possessions? Ul, come in. What I meant to say, Kaviman, is Ul, come in. Join us. We'll have a l'chaim. But not to Asye. We don't want you to compel him. We don't want you to twist his arm and say to him, well, don't you want to do the benefit, the best for your daughter? Don't you want to give her a great nedunya? I'm not asking you to do that. Just come in and be part of the simcha. Amalei shemale didei hainu asiyeh. I'm going to add a few words here. He didn't say these words, but I'm such a great scholar that in my presence, Abba is going to be very embarrassed unless he gives a major chunk of his funds as an adunya for his daughter. So in effect, my presence in the room will serve as a psychological pressure, compelling Abba to part with his nechasim for the sake of nedunya. At the end, Achve, Rav Papa said to Yehuda bar Meremar, I'm not taking no for an answer. And he compels Yehuda bar Meremar to enter in. He begs him, Pashut. He begs him, come in and join us. And Yehuda bar Meremar apparently was at this point embarrassed, and he didn't want to refuse Rav Papa, the great Rav Papa, and he went inside. But again, he didn't want to in any way, even indirectly influence and psychologically pressure Abba to give a sizable, an extended sum of money as nedunya for his daughter, Ishtik. And Yosef took a back seat. He didn't say a word. He was silent. Mum's the word. And now Abba Surah, the father of the Kal, is trying to figure out why is it that Yehuda bar Meremar is taking a back seat? Why is he quiet? Why isn't he part of this exciting moment in which we're engaging the son of a great scholar to the daughter of a very chashuv man, apparently quite wealthy as well, probably, and his name is Abba. Savar. Abba came to the following conclusion. Iu mirtach rotach. He must be angry about something. What could he be angry about? Why is he so silent? Why isn't he jumping into the fun? Why isn't he grabbing my arm and dancing with me? It must be that he's disappointed with the Nedunya, that he thinks I didn't give what I should be giving to marry off my daughter to the son of the great Rav Papa. He starts jacking up the price of the Nedunya. All because Yehuda Bar Meimar is taking a back seat and he's silent. He writes in this document as an Nedunya, I am giving to my daughter a dowry every last cent in my bank account. Lissof, at the end, guess what? Yehuda is still silent, still not willing to open his mouth. Amalei Habasura says to him, Hashta Nami Lo Mishtoi Mar. Now, why don't I hear a peep from you? He talks to him in third person Mar. And maybe you suspect that I'm not giving everything that I have in my possession for this Nedunya. Chai Damar. I swear by the life of my master, Kvodo, talks in the third person. Lo shavike midi l'nafshi. I didn't leave anything else left for myself. I was posek nechasim to my daughter, everything, every last red cent that I had. Amalei Yehuda Bar Meimar says to him the following: Imi noi didei. If you would have asked me for a good recommendation, afilu hai nami de kosavs, even the original amount of money that you thought you would earmark for your daughter's nedunya, lo nichale, I would have said you gave too much money. In other words, even when Abba initially was intending to give perhaps 10%, I don't know, 20% of his assets for the nedunya, Yehuda Bar Meimar would have said, you're exaggerating. You don't have to give so much money. I wasn't satisfied with the amount of money that you intended to give. And now you gave every last cent? Amalei, so Abba, in a very naive kind of way, says to him, Hashta Nami Ahaderbi? Should I now disqualify the agreement? Should I renege? Should I rescind my original agreement? Because obviously I made a mistake. I thought that you were here to encourage me to give more and more money for my nedunya. And I know that you weren't even happy with the initial sum of money. I certainly would have given away every last penny. But Yehuda Bar Meimar says, Shavya nafshech, you've accepted upon yourself. I never would have encouraged you to do so, but you did it. And you made a statement, and you made a pledge, and you enunciated verbally that you're giving all your money. Hadra lo kamina, I would not tell you to rescind your agreement. The person has to live up to his very word, even in a case where he gave his agreement under false assumptions. And personally, what I take out of this story is that, Rav Papa was not sensitive to the implications and the repercussions of the presence of Yehuda Bar Meimar in the house of Abba Sur at that particular Ma'amad. Boy, mine Rav Yema Saba. Me Rav Nachman, the elderly Rav Yemar, asked the following question from Nachman: Machra ksubasa labayla yesh la ksubas banim dichrin o ein la ksubas banim dichrin. Yesterday's daf was about ksubas banim dichrin, which is a certain wing, or shall we say a branch, of a ksuba. And that designates a certain amount of money to one particular son, or any sons from this marriage. He had sons from a previous marriage from a different wife. And now the question is, supposing a woman in the course of marriage, she's very desperate for funds, And in order to achieve funds, she sells her ksuba to her husband. Now, the ksuba itself, let's say if it's a first marriage, for her would be 200 zuz. He's not going to pay the full price, 200 zuz, but let's say they'll come up with an agreement. He'll pay 2/3 of that amount, and he'll buy off the ksuba so that he saves himself the Masayim zuz. Now she sold her ksuba. Does that undermine the ksuba's banim dichrin, the rights of her sons to get a special portion in the inheritance? In other words, the question that Rav Yemer is raising here is whether ksuba's banim dichrin is part and parcel of the essential ksuba. And if there's no ksuba because it was sold, then ipso facto there's no ksubas banim dichrin. Or do you say no? That ksubas banim dichrin is a separate entity and has a life of its own. And even if the ksuba was purchased, nevertheless the ksubas banim dichrin still remains intact. Rava looked at Rav Yemer and he said to him, you know what? You could have asked an identical question, but in a much simpler and more common kind of way. A woman says to her husband, quote, I am mocheles the ksuba. I waive my rights to the ksuba. That's called mechila. Whenever someone owes you a debt, you as the Baal Chov have a right to wipe off the debt with mechila. Right? Today is the first day of Elul. So this is the day in which we start asking Hashem for mechila. We owe God a tremendous debt, many debts, for all our iniquities. And now we're asking Hashem for mechila. If you owe me money, then you can ask me for mechila, and I can be mochel l'chov. And now the Baal owes his wife ksuba, and she could be mocheles l'chov. How does that mechila impact on ksubas banim dichrin? And apparently Rav understood that mechiras haksuba is very rare, but mechilas haksuba is much more commonplace. So it's the identical question conceptually, but why not formulate it in the following scenario, which is much more commonplace, namely mechila? Omar Leiser of Yemer Saba responds, and he says, Hashna mocheres kami boili. If I'm asking what's the din in a case where she sells her ksuba to the husband, you might say that Zuzi on Sua, she's only selling a ksuba because she needs money desperately. She's in an ones situation, mitigating circumstances. Diamina, Kimanda Kamachule Mea Uchli Beuchla. It's as if she's being hit over the head 100 times with a ritzua, with a strap that has some sort of metal ending to it. In other words, she's really anusa. She's so desperate. A woman never wants to part with her ksuba unless she's really, really down and out. And nevertheless, I still vacillate about this question, and I think that maybe she, even under those mitigating circumstances, has given up and waived her rights to the ksuba in such a way that it's going to impact on her male sons. Mocheles mi boy, how much more so would I doubt and vacillate about the question of whether Paka's chusa in a case where she wasn't anusa? Omar Rava pshito. I can answer your question. Why? Mocheres ksubasa lacherim. Let's differentiate between two cases. One case is where she's desperate for funds and she sells her ksuba on the open market. And the buyer buys what's called tovas hana. Tovas hana is a concept in halacha which means that I step into your shoes, and it's very questionable whether or not I'm going to gain from this or not, but I'm willing to pay you, because I'm a gambling man, a certain percentage of the original price. So in a case where she sold her ksuba to acherim, in that case, what the buyer has purchased, it's like buying futures, but these are conditional futures, as all futures are, right? And if he the husband dies, then she, instead of collecting her own ksuba, now the loteach who purchased the ksuba will stand in her shoes and collect the ksuba in event that the husband dies. So it means that if she had not sold her ksuba and she would have died first during the lifetime of her husband would inherit her ksuba. So therefore, the buyer is taking a chance. He doesn't know who's going to die first. Because if she dies first, then there won't be any payment to the ksuba, because the Baal then inherits her ksuba. He's holding out that hopefully the Baal will die first. Now, again, keep in mind that when she sold the ksuba, she didn't really have rights to collect the ksuba. Her husband is still alive at that point. And if she dies during the lifetime of her husband, she will never actually materialize her rights to collect the ksuba. As we said before, because her husband will inherit the ksuba. And in this case, Yeshla ksubas banim dichrin, even though she sold her ksuba on the open market to a buyer, a speculator, nevertheless, as far as banim scharim are concerned, ksubas banim dichrin, they will inherit what they have to inherit as a separate entity of ksubas banim dichrin. My timer. And why don't we penalize her? And we say, well, you know what? If you sold your ksuba, then you sold all the rights that you could have had to the ksuba, even the rights that you had to transfer your husband's monies after his death to your sons. And the answer is Zuze Ansua. Because we're not going to punish her. We're not going to penalize her. She was desperate and she had to sell the ksuba. Now, Rava comes back to the question that was originally posed here by Rav Yemer. Ksubasa, mocheles ksubasa lebayim. Ein lo ksubas banim dichrin. I'm going to have to conclude that if she was mocheles haksuba, which means she got no benefit whatsoever. You can't tell me that Zuze Ansua, that she was desperate for funds, and that's why she did what she did to cancel and undermine her ksuba, because in Mochela, she gets absolutely nothing. My time at Achule Achilta, once she was Mochel the ksuba, she gets nothing. It's bechinam. Then we're not going to make a takana here on her behalf of Banim Zichrin, that her male son should inherit that particular portion in the husband's estate. Boy, Rav, another suffix. Mocheres ksubasa lebayla. What if she sells her ksuba to her husband? That was the original issue. Mocheres lacherim dami, she would equate it with the case of mocheres lacherim, and now that she gets benefit because instead of selling it on the market, she sold it to her own husband, and he's paying money for it. Therefore, it must be Zuze Anse, and therefore the takana banims of Ksubas Banim Zichrin is still in place. Oh, or should we say no? The case of selling the Ksuba to our own husband is like Mechila. And Bosa Debaye Hadar Pashta, after he raised his question, he came to the following conclusion, Rava, tipped the scale, and he says, Mocheres Ksuba, the Bailuk and Mocheres Lacherim Dami, and therefore the Ksubas Banim Dichrin is still in place. Why? Because again, we're going to apply the principle of Zuze Ansua, because what difference does it make whether she gets money by selling her Ksuba on the open market or by selling her Ksuba to her husband? In both cases, she was desperate for money, and therefore she gave up on her rights to Masayim, but in lieu of the Masayim, she gets whatever she gets. Maybe she'll collect 150, whatever amount of money they agree to, but that's not going to undermine the Ksubas Banim Dichrin. Masiv Rav Idi Bar Ovin. And now we have a case that'll give us an opportunity to review something that we learned in Daf Yomi in Masechet Yevamis on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis. A woman goes out to Medina Sayyam. Sorry, start again. A woman's husband goes out to Medina Sayyam, and one witness comes to the wife and testifies that your husband died. And she goes ahead and gets married. And then her husband comes back on 2 feet, alive and well. Her children are mamzerim. And if she relied on the Yed Echad and she got married to another man, then she has 2 illegitimate marriages, and she needs to get from both of them. She doesn't get a ksuba from any of them. Mesa. And if she dies, now her children from both marriages are considered mamzerim. And she has children from her first husband. Ein yorshin shel zeh ve'ein yorshin shel zeh yorshim ksubasa. Neither of these 2 sets of children who are potentially yorshim will inherit her ksuba. Vavinan ba, and we ask the following question: Ksuba maya vidita. How do we know that she gets a ksuba? She lost her ksuba. She was penalized. She lost her ksuba. That's what it says in the Mishnah Yevamos. So how can you tell me that her children did not inherit a ksuba? There is no ksuba to inherit. Or a couple of ksubas, but indifferent. Rav Papa says that it must be that the Mishnah there in Yevamos is referring to ksubas banim dichrin. And the Mishnah is telling us that if she dies during the lifetime of these 2 husbands, so to speak, and after that, these 2 husbands died eventually, then when the children of these 2 husbands come to divide up their father's property, then they don't take the ksuba, they don't pick up and collect the ksuba of their mother, as normally there is banim dichrin. So now the Gemara asks, Samai, Hachanami lema yetzer ansa. We just finished saying that the action of a woman does not undermine the ksubas banim dichrin in event that she was, so to speak, justified. In other words, there were mitigating circumstances and pressures. Here also there was pressure. She wanted to get married. The Eid Echad testified that her husband died. She was very desperate, and somebody offered to marry her. She got married. And the Gemara answers no. We're going to undermine ksubas banim dichrin. Why? Because hasam knasa hu de kansur rabbanan. The entire episode of relying on the testimony of Eid Echad is based on daiko mitzvah. Daiko mitzvah, if you remember that principle, is that a woman goes out, she investigates to be absolutely certain that her husband died. And apparently she didn't do so. She was guilty of not doing her due diligence, and therefore we're going to penalize her and remove her totally from her ksuba, even as far as banim dichrin. Yosef Ravin Bar Chanina Kamed Rav Chisda Yosef Kamar Michmed Rav Elazar Molcheles Ksubasa Labaila Ein Lo Mizonos. Right, support is part of the ksuba, but now she sold her ksuba. If she sold her ksuba, even to her very husband, then she waives and forfeits her rights to support, because even after her husband dies, when normally an almana widow collects mizonos from the yarshim, but nevertheless, in this case, since there's no ksuba, there's no framework for her to have rights to mizonos to be supported, because she sold her ksuba. Amalei Rav Chisda says he loved her ka'amrit le mishmei gavarav. If not for the fact that Rav Chisda, you said this in the name of the great Rabbi Eliezer, Hava min I would have said that she should collect mizonos. Why? And he quotes a pasuk in Mishlei. Meishiv ra tachas tova. Someone who gives back evil when he got something good. That's an ingrate. Lo tamush ra mi beso. He will suffer evil in his house. Here she went ahead and she was mochel haksuba. That's a great tova for the Baal. And now as a result, you're going to slap her in the face and you're going to say that she doesn't collect mizonos? That's paying ra tachas tova. Yosef Rav Nachman, the Ula of Avini bar Rav Papi, the Yosef Rav Chia bar Imi Gabayu, Osahu David Shchiva Rusoso. A man came by, and after Erison Nebuch, his wife died, and he wants to know, does he have to bury her? Burial was very expensive. Amri Lei, so they answered him that an Arusa has rights to a ksuba, and within the framework of a ksuba, a man obligates himself to bury his wife after she dies. Zil Kvar, go ahead and bury her. I'll give you another option. Oh, Havla Ksubasa, pay up the ksuba. Once you pay up the ksuba, there's no longer an obligation within the framework of the ksuba. You've already paid it up, and therefore you don't have to bury her. Those are your two options. Amalei Rab Chia Tanina, we learned in a brisa that an arutza doesn't have rights to a ksuba, and therefore she has no rights to demand kfura. Ishto arusa, if a man's wife after erisin before nesuit, lo onein, if she dies, he's not an onein. Notice he's not enjoined from eating kachim or anything into the Beis Hamikdash, and if he's a kohen lo mitami lo, he should not bury him. V'chein hi lo nenes. And if her husband died and she's only an arusa, she's not an aninus, and she's not prohibited from eating kachim, velo mitamilo, and she doesn't have to touch his body in order to bury it. Mesa ain't a yarsha. The Baal does not inherit the nedunya of his wife because there was only erison and there was no nisuin. Mesu, if he dies, gova ksubasa. She collects the ksuba. So Rav Chizda says, based on this brisa, Taima de Meshu, why does she collect her ksuba? Because he died. Are you telling me that on Mesa he, if she died during his lifetime, ain't lo ksuba, meaning he doesn't have to bury her? If she died first? Because you're telling me that there's no din of a ksuba for an arutza. So why did you tell me originally that even in an arutza who died, you have to bury her? My timer, why is it that if the arusa dies during the lifetime of her husband, he doesn't have to bury her? Eino tzarch lekovra, he doesn't have to bury her. Amar Avoshia she'einani koriba, because if we learn up the language of the ksuba, and it says in the ksuba, "Lichtetinasi liacher titli mashakasuv lich." I'm not going to be obligated in the ksuba unless she's allowed to marry someone else. So if he dies or he divorces her, she's allowed to marry someone else, and at that point he's chayiv in the ksuba. But here he didn't die and he didn't divorce her. She died during his lifetime. So therefore, he's not obligated to pay the ksuba. And if he's not obligated to pay the ksuba, he doesn't inherit the ksuba. And therefore, he doesn't have to bury her because his obligation to bury her after she dies is within the framework of the ksuba. But he doesn't get a ksuba because there wasn't any shibud for the ksuba. Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar, he declared in the name of Reish Lakish, Arusa should be saying, look, Tsuma, that if the Arusa dies and her husband now is called upon to pay the ksuba, he doesn't have to pay the ksuba. Because again, she died during Erison and they never consummated the marriage. Amalu Abaye, so Abaye said, Zilu Amrila. And go tell Ravin